Please take your seats quickly, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tennis Weekly with Joel, Kim and Chris. On today's Tennis Weekly Meets, sponsored by DownloadTennis.com.
We chat with creator Hania Elkington and British tennis star Naomi Cavaday about the forthcoming Amazon Prime miniseries 15 Love.
Chris, it's another episode of Tennis Weekly Meets, and I'm really excited to welcome 15 Love creator and executive producer Hania Elkington onto the show, alongside tennis star, script, and tennis consultant on 15 Love, Naomi Cavaday.
Hello, very nice to be here.
It's great to have you here, and how are you both? Wimbledon is on. It's very fitting to be recording on ladies' semi-finals days. Are we watching, and how are we coping?
I mean, well, we're certainly not doing any work. Now that I finished this show, I can't make the excuse that watching tennis is work anymore. So I have simply not been working and watching tennis instead.
And I am in a very fortunate position where watching tennis is very much what I'm paid to do. So I have been sat at Wimbledon all day, every day, watching some phenomenal matches from our very privileged position of our commentary box, which is the best seat in the house. We're at court level, they're right in front of us, so you can see it all. The sweat just flies onto our body. But yeah.
Doesn't sound that great.
I was like, I'd rather stay in my living room sofa, actually.
Yeah, it's a lot drier there. But you are both tennis fans. Obviously, Naomi, you're commentating. But Hania, the big question we had to ask when watching this, are you a tennis fan? You said you're watching Wimbledon, and were you a tennis fan before you started working on this?
I have always been a fan of tennis. I was brought up in Barnes, so I think it was always on my sort of radar. I fell in love with watching some of those amazing tennis players in the 90s. Agassi was my player of choice because he was such an emotional player, and I just loved kind of how writ large everything was on his face. I didn't realize quite how much he was going through until I read his autobiography for the research for this. And I even worked for a short period at the front desk at the Tennis Federation in Roehampton. So tennis has been part of my life since a young age. And then when I started working on 15 Love, I really started to kind of do my research and watch more. And so my passion has grown.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting, I feel, getting a tennis series on Amazon Prime. I mean, we've obviously had, Breakpoint from Netflix, but now this is going to be really, really fascinating to watch. I mean, from your kind of point of view, can you just tell us a little bit about the show? The trailer has dropped. Myself and Chris have been lucky enough to have a sneak peek preview at the series, and we've both loved it. For our listeners, how would you describe the show? So
the show centres on Justine Pierce, who grows up a bit of a tennis prodigy. At the age of 17, she gets a wild card to the French Open and she makes it through to the semi-finals. She's got the world at her feet. She's the new British hope. She has this incredibly kind of hot-housed, symbiotic, successful relationship with her coach, Glenn Lapthorne. And then out on court, in front of a global stage, the worst thing conceivable happens. She sustains a terrible wrist injury, and crashes out of the tournament. She doesn't rehabilitate. She doesn't continue in the world of competitive tennis. She becomes a physical therapist at the academy where she used to train. Our series begins when her old coach, Glenn, having just won the French Open, comes back into her life. And as they're drawn into each other's orbits, we see that Justine is still very hurt, very bitter about what happened to her. We also realised very quickly that she was in love with Glenn, and she makes explosive allegations against him, which kicks off a story that affects, obviously them, their friends, their personal families, and their sporting families.
Fantastic. And in terms of kind of some of the themes that you've talked about there, it seems like, and we've talked about Breakpoint, there's lots of this when it comes to tennis, especially with Challengers and Zendaya. That trailer also dropped, I think, almost the same week. So
was that planned, or what was going on there? Because it felt very much like London buses in terms of like two tennis things coming on at the same time.
It did, didn't it? And it actually sort of helped, I think, to kind of drum up more kind of interesting conversations. They're like, oh, I look, which one looks better and which one will you watch? And it was not planned. But you're right that with King Richard last year and then Breakpoint, I think people are not only interested in watching dramas about tennis, but also know more about behind the scenes and where the personal and professional overlap and what that space looks like and feels like for the players.
Because that's what I was going to ask, because what do you think it is about the subject matter that makes it something that kind of really does capture the attention of audiences and filmmakers alike, in terms of is it those dynamics behind the scenes they don't get to see, and the contrast between, the grass courts of Wimbledon, everyone wearing white, being very prim and proper, and then the realities being very different behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that really drew me to it, and I think really appeals to everyone, is the sort of gladiatorial aspect of it. It's a single player sport. So you really have sort of the spotlight on these single athletes, these big personalities. And it's got such a psychological aspect as well. It's one of those games where it's the psychology that can really take your game to the next level. And you can see all of that playing out on the court and in the relationships between the players and the coaches. Tennis has recently been described as brutal combat disguised as a vicar's tea party. And I think, what's not thrilling to dissect about that for a writer and also for a viewer? I think, when I read interviews with players, what is clear to me is that the personal and the professional and the pain and the joy of triumph are all very hard to untangle. And that those are the conundrums and biting points that this series really looks at.
No, that's so true. Naomi, from a tennis player's experience, do you ever feel like it was a brutal vicar's tea party?
I love that as an analogy. I'm not sure. I suppose the vicar's tea party definitely focused at Wimbledon. I mean, look, quite frankly, I'm sure you guys would agree, tennis is the best sport in the world. And quite simply, I mean, there's just so much drama that happens within tennis. I mean, plus everything that happens behind the scenes. There's so much to get your teeth stuck into. And it's also incredibly unique because, yes, it's my opinion that it's the best sport in the world, but quite factually, it is the biggest sport on the planet for women by a country mile to be involved in. And, it's phenomenal that you can be earning millions of dollars a year and be a complete nobody as a female athlete, in terms of you can walk down the street and no one knows who you are. Of course, we have the absolute superstars, but, I think it's really fascinating, because it is the pinnacle of women's sport. It is the number one thing, as I say, globally in any country. It has the individual nature. It is also wildly dominated by male coaches that think they know best. I think it leads to some really fascinating dynamics. And I've always been really interested in that from my playing days and post, as to, really just why is it the case that there are so few female coaches? I mean, a handful at Wimbledon across 128 players. There's 128 coaches. And as I say, probably less than I can count on one hand. And I think a lot of this stuff really plays into that, which is why I was so excited when I saw the script and saw the theme. It wasn't just a simple sort of, here's a relationship and very sort of straightforward. It was about the power dynamics, the control, and everything else that goes with it, all the stuff that, I see.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, the aspect of tennis where you've got on court and off court, and they can both provide such powerful stories, particularly when they, I think, come together. Hania, where did your journey start with 15 Love? You spoke about the research process and how you really, really enjoyed that. What was kind of the inspiration to write 15 Love? I think you told us it was it's been in the making for over 4 years. How has that journey to this point been for you?
It's been long.
It sounds long.
It's been long and very, very rewarding is the truth. Where did it begin? So I've wanted to write a sports narrative for a long time, and I've always, in truth, been a bit intimidated by the scale and the fact that it's a very male-dominated arena, and just the visual effects and all that side of things. I read this article about towards the end of 2019 And it was this female journalist, and she was looking back at relationships she'd had in her teens, sometimes with older men. And she was talking about how she felt about those relationships 10, 15 years later. And I thought, how interesting to look at a really hothouse relationship with that hindsight and through that lens. And at the same time, there were some stories coming up in the press, both about tennis and other sports, which shone a light on the complexities of the coach-player relationship, let us say, because when it works, it is brilliant. And as we were saying, psychologically, it can lift a player to the next level, because you're always going to have an older coach with more experience and a younger player who's, in some cases very, almost a child operating in an adult world. So it can be transformational and brilliant. There are undercurrents that come with that. So I thought, all right, well, maybe this is my sports narrative. And I started doing research, and then as I started writing it through 2020 and 2021, a lot more stories snowballed. Female psychology was coming under the spotlight. You had Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka and Emma Raducanu talking so eloquently and openly about their experience. And I thought, wow, this is really hitting a slipstream and might be a very topical moment for a show like this to land.
And in terms of Naomi, how did you kind of get involved in the show, and what was your expertise that you were bringing to 15 Love the series? Was it your tennis experiences? Was it how to hit a forehand or a backhand? Was it just to make sure it just all looked accurate and that the portrayal of tennis on TV was befitting of real life?
It's called
How did
15
you
Love, which is a good start, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually quite accidental to start off with, really. I got contacted by my sister-in-law, who is nothing to do with tennis, but her best friend works at World Productions, who were creating it. And I believe, Hania can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially, they were working on the script, they had everything locked down, they had the green light, and they needed to find someone who worked in the world of tennis, and he was the only one who said, well, I know someone. I've only met him a few times. So I was asked if I would sort of speak to Hania and to Jake, the other executive producer, and take a look at the scripts. And some of them had been written, and Hania was still working on them. And really, originally, it was about looking at the scripts and helping to be a script editor and advisor on the very tennis-specific side of things, so the language and that sort of thing. But very quickly after, once I was chatting away with Hania, we were talking about experiences and talking about specific characters, how they would act, certain lines I've heard in real life and anecdotes. And, it was, as I say, it was just very fortunate because it is something that I have been very fascinated by, very passionate about since I stopped playing, from my own experiences and what I've seen around. And trying to unpick it all, really. And so it was a really good opportunity to do that. My initial thought was just, yes, this is about time, because I do think it's really interesting if it can be done in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something where I kind of had the question of, when you kind of took the role, were you concerned that you were going to end up in a situation where you might have someone holding the wrong grip on a poster like they had for Challengers, and you thought, please don't let me be a meme, as well as kind of advising on this and making sure, because if there's one shot that's hit wrong, people will be coming for Naomi on this one?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a great opportunity to really get involved. And then as we started filming, I was signed on, and I was very keen to help in every single aspect I possibly could to really make the world. And you've got the drama and the storyline, which of course was taken care of by Hania and by World Productions, who make amazing dramas. It's what they do. It's phenomenal. So I was right, it's going to be great. And then my job was really to help make sure that the world was believable. But also, it's something I was passionate about, and this is something that Hania and Jake said to me as well, was that it was aspirational, that it was buzzy and glossy, and a place where people want to be, because of course, the storyline is challenging, but I have no interest in making tennis look bad. As I say, it's the best sport in the world. The opportunities are amazing. Yes, there are flaws, there are pitfalls, there are things that need to be highlighted. But I saw that as a really key role, and I wanted the tennis to look as believable, but as amazing as possible. I wanted people to watch this and say they want to get involved in tennis. Yes, there's a story about two individuals. It's not always positive. It's not always rosy, but yeah, that's just life. That could happen in any walk of life. And as I say, that was my aim. So fingers crossed I achieved that.
Yeah, I mean, from watching it, I definitely think so. And from watching kind of some of the ways that kind of the setup was around the tournament, it really did feel like those matches had that sort of big atmosphere, and some of the technique on show I think was very impressive. We've got a few more questions on that a little bit later. But one question that we absolutely wanted to make sure that we asked was around kind of is to Hania, in terms of the fact that we feel that so many people will relate to the characters that are in this. And the way that it was done was obviously to speak to a wider audience than kind of just tennis. She's so real in terms of whether your experience is kind of playing at a Grand Slam or whether you don't play tennis at all. But what she goes through is actually something that is so prevalent in the tennis community, especially. How important was it for you to kind of shine a light on this and some of the abuses of power and some of the dynamics that are at work and are kind of essential, having, as you said, a coach that is older, is very much the norm. How important was it to shine light on a story like this?
I mean, shining lights on stories like this is what I do. I like to be a bit of a kind of a disruptor and take the temperature and figure out what people need to hear and what we should be talking about. You know, I think the story in the first instance puts a really interesting lens just on the experience of being a young person, physical perfection, chronic isolation, peer rivalry, especially, social media, public humiliation. These are all things that I think will be relatable, not just to the tennis community, but to a much wider audience. But in terms of this particular nexus, this coach-player relationship, there have been so many great and enlightening things in the press and on podcasts by people talking about their experience. But a younger demographic where these sort of 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds they don't necessarily, that's not how they consume media necessarily through reading broadsheets or this and that. They watch streamer shows. So it felt like putting some of these conversations, which are very well intended, yes, they're sometimes inflammatory, onto that platform felt like a really good way to reach that demographic, and I just think it's the right time to get some sort of fresh eyes and voices into the conversation.
Absolutely, and it does feel like the nature of being on Prime is something that will allow many more people to discover it and to discover those stories in a way that you wouldn't necessarily have always thought it would be able to reach such a wide audience with a story that maybe not every single part of media has that much of a vested interest in talking about particularly.
Yes, absolutely. I think from my perspective as a writer, taking a fictional angle, Justine Pearce is a fictional character, Glenn Lapthorne is a fictional character. Yes, they exist within the world of tennis, but these are two individuals making their own choices and having their own storyline. And I think that was very freeing for me. We fictionalized Wimbledon, we fictionalized the government, the governing bodies. And so I was able to tell a story and create characters who, the character of Justine, when I was writing her, I thought, oh my God, I'm writing this incredibly complex, very difficult role for a 22-year-old. And that someone's going to have to step up and be the heart of this extraordinary big streamer show. But she's the heart of the story, so it had to be that way.
And just on that, how much of a challenge was it when it came to casting? As you said, you're making these characters that have that are quite complex when you're writing them. How did that kind of translate into finding actors to play them? Because you have Ella, Lily, Hyland, and Aidan Turner. I think, obviously they're great in terms of bringing those stories to life and having the appeal, on Amazon Prime, I think, to kind of really bring in like a non-tennis audience. What was it like working with them, and how did you, as I say, kind of go through that process of casting and finding individuals that would be up to the task of demonstrating the complexities you wanted to show in your script?
Yeah, so we cast our Justine first because I think, as I said before, she creates the gravitational force for the entire show. She's the heart of it, and we did a huge, very inclusive, diverse sweep of actors with our great casting director, Lauren Evans. And there were so many boxes to tick, so many bells to ring, so many emotional, dramatic things to be achieved. And honestly, when I started watching the auditions, I thought I'm going to have to modify the part. I'll write to the person who's good. And then we saw Ella, and she just ate it alive, and all of us were kind of blown away. And we'd all watched the audition separately, and we came on to all the executive producers, our amazing director, Eva Riley, and Jake and I came on to a Zoom session together, and we all said, listen, there's someone, and I really think they're the right person. And we were all a bit defensive and a bit kind of, and then it turned out we all loved, Ella. And so that made it very easy. And then Aidan, I really wanted somebody who, both Ella and Aidan in person are just rays of sunshine. You meet them and they're full of great energy. They're so game, they're so brave, and sort of, have been so fearless in exploring this. But for Glenn, I really wanted someone who you meet them and every fibre in your body tells you they're a great person. And Glenn Lapthorne is a great person in many ways. He's a great father. He's a great coach. And Aidan brings that buoyancy and that good energy and dependability to the role that I thought was really important. I think it's also key to say that when we're talking about coaches and players and having the difference in age and experience, we, of course, had that same disparity in terms of our two lead actors. Aidan's very experienced. He's older. Ella Lilly has done very little on screen, although she is, I think it's quickly being made evident, an absolute powerhouse of an actor. And so we needed to make sure that we shored Ella up and gave her as much sort of input as possible. And Naomi, apart from all of her incredible work on the tennis, I think was so generous with all the young actors, actually, in terms of opening doors, really letting them into the experience of what it feels like, what it looks like. And it's not just the tennis, it's how you hold a racket, it's the psychology around certain relationships and events. It's all of these small details. And she was a font of that all the way through. And I think it sort of imbued the drama, hopefully, with, as she said, just that sense of authenticity that allows you to relax and go, oh, well, the tennis is in safe hands. Let's see what's going on in the story. So I think she was a really holistic, you, Naomi, were a very holistic presence in all those ways throughout the drama. And that is something that really sort of elevated all the performances as well.
Because that's a question we were just literally about to ask in terms of...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic because we're asking it to Naomi as well, but in terms of how important it was for the tennis scenes to not necessarily detract from the powerful themes and powerful performances of the actors, because they know that they're doing things in the right way. And when it comes to being viewed or watching it back, that it will be fully convincing. How much of a challenge was that to get that right? And also, how did you manage to get it right? Because I think that was one of the things I'm looking at it. I think Ella said in an interview she wanted to be Maria Sharapova in a couple of months. She really was determined to get it down. So it seemed like they were very much game for it. But yeah, how important was to get the tennis right to make sure that everything else still felt just as powerful?
I mean, it was hugely ambitious. There's no two ways about it. But I was really up for the challenge. I think I recognised very quickly, speaking with Hania and Jake, that the most important thing was that they did have that insight into what it's like. It is a very strange position to be in when you're 17 years old. At 17 years old, I had to sit down and fire a 40-year-old man. And there's contracts and there's all sorts to sort out. He's crying. It's absolutely horrendous. You don't know what you're doing, how you're doing it. You essentially become CEO of your own company overnight. You're 16. You have no skills to do anything. And there's this very, very strange dynamic. And this was the conversation I had with Ella, where she really, I think, started latching on. When we were in a training session, we had a good chat. And she really sort of, I think the penny dropped when I was explaining that, as the player in this situation, you are ultimately the boss, and you can fire your coach over breakfast for absolutely no reason. We see it happen all the time. However, you are desperate for somebody to come and take control of your career, which in essence is your life. That really is, and that's the real juxtaposition we see, particularly on the women's tour, is that, as I say, ultimately you can fire your coach, but you want your coach to come in and say, right, this is what we're doing, I'm in charge. they're not really in charge, which I think leads to a lot of the really unprofessional behaviour you see, because they try and form closer relationships so that they don't get fired. I didn't fire a coach for a year longer than it should have been, because we were just too close. It was impossible for me to think about that. And as I say, when I finally did, he's crying and all that sort of stuff. So the pressures of those relationships are so ridiculously intense. So I think I recognised that was the main priority, because that's the story. And what I love so much, like Hania was saying, is about the complexity of it. It's not straightforward. It's not just good, bad, and moving on. When it comes to the tennis, obviously that was going to be a huge factor, and it was just about, I think, managing expectations of the production company as to what could be achieved in a very short space of time, and also managing those expectations with the actors as well. That was very difficult, and basically, saying strongly that I can make them look really good at tennis, but I have to be doing it in a very specific way. And there are certain things that I'm just not going to waste my time with. So, for example, you mentioned the Zendaya poster for challenges, and she's in that position behind the head on the serving motion, or maybe it's a smash. I don't know, it doesn't look like a shot. We're not sure. But
was that in your mind every time you were kind of going to work? You're like, I can't make it look like there's a pancake serve going from an elite level player.
But that was just something that I said from the very beginning: is we can never ever see an actor in that position, because it takes top world class juniors years to build that part up, and it's just such an obvious tell that you're not a professional. So it was very easy then, obviously, to work around it, because I just said clearly, I'm not even going to bother. I'm not going to get I had to get coaches to work with these players. I trained them as well myself. And it was just about understanding what the priorities were, which was difficult because I don't have any experience in TV. I don't know, what magic they can work. Turns out plenty, which is excellent. It was really fun, I'd say. Yeah.
There were no tennis balls, Naomi, at all. None. It was all CGI.
It was all CGI.
Yeah, well, yes, it was. So, and that was the first thing that I said, in one of the big production meetings, was just like, look, in tennis, the most difficult part is receiving. Everybody focuses on the sending skills and the shots. And that's what we want, is we want those sending skills. But the receiving skills really don't matter. But it's the hardest bit of tennis, to see a ball, track it, run to it, move to it, and hit the ball. And they're supposed to be acting. It was just going to be impossible. So I just said, look, if we just take out the receiving skills, they can just concentrate on how they deliver their shots. And then I think we can get to a position where they will feel fairly autonomous, and they'll be able to act as well as, deliver some pretty decent technique. But as I say, there were certain elements of technique that I just said, we're never going to see that. So we have body doubles and lots of other things that we could use to fill in those gaps. But I tried to, I don't know whether Hania feels this, but I tried to, from the very beginning all the way through, there were always going to be problems and challenges and things where I think, oh, well, that wouldn't happen, or this is different, or whatever. But I always tried to be somebody who would come up with a solution, a way of making it work, a way of meeting in the middle. I never wanted to just stand there and say, well, that wouldn't happen. I mean, that's just nonsense. And it was very much the same with the actors. It was about finding, where they wanted to go and helping them get there, and trying lots of things. And they all had strengths and weaknesses to work around. But yeah, look, it was an almighty challenge. But as I say, I wanted it to be the best it could possibly be. And, I always wanted it to be positive. And yeah, look, making TV series, and Hania has more experience than I do, plenty of problems come up on a daily basis. But right, how can we resolve it? How can we make it work? And, that was my goal.
And in terms of, we've spoken about making sure like the tennis looks real, but talking about the post tennis career, because there's a lot of focus, I think, particularly early on in the series, around that sort of adjustment from, the glitz and glam of the tour, and then essentially going back to a normal life. Naomi, as obviously as like an ex-pro and going through that transition as well, were you able also to kind of make sure that was a realistic portrayal on the screen as well?
Yeah, I mean, my absolute favourite scene is a scene at the very beginning of episode 6, and I cried the first 4 times I watched it, I think, and 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 that is Ella's acting. And actually, I didn't really get involved in this particular scene, but it really hit home. And I messaged Ella straight after I'd watched it, because I wasn't there for that part of the filming. And it was about, and really the emotions conveyed are about, a former pro who is, incredibly happy for somebody else doing incredibly well, for somebody that they're close to, but also mourning the career that was cut short. Now, my career was cut short for different reasons to Justine, but I've been sat in that position, and when you're in that player box watching them, that mix of emotions, the delight, especially when you're fresh, those first few years are really tough. It's really tough to see other people doing what you thought you would be doing, and that's the difficulty. You never know when your peak is going to be. You reach a Grand Slam final. I was talking to Greg Rosetsky about this the other day, and I was talking to him about his Grand Slam final, and he said, "Well, I just assumed there'd be more, right? You always assume you're on the journey up, and that you're going to keep going, and you're going to play to your mid-30s. You don't really anticipate that things are going to be cut short for whatever reason." So you do, and anybody that I speak to who finishes tennis because they choose to, or because they're forced to, or just because they're old, I always say it's a grieving process for you and for everybody else that has put so much into it. It's been your entire life, and when I say entire life, it's every minute of every day. It consumes you. So, that was for me the most powerful scene, and the acting I thought was absolutely remarkable. And I even said to Ella, I was like, I didn't realise I'd felt that until I watched you do it, and then it just hit me. I was like, oh my God, that's exactly how I felt. And it's it's with the best will in the world, but it's just the reality of the situation.
No, that's that's incredible, because then not only, Hania, have you managed to make an impact on the wider population, but also people who've been through it have rediscovered things about their own experience that they're seeing up on screen.
From the very beginning, if the script felt right to Naomi, if the tennis looks right, and if I can make her cry, that's the gold standard. If I can make Naomi cry. And then Judy Murray came to the press screening and she said, Hania, I watched it, like sitting right up to the screen, like trying to find something to go, oh, well, the tennis was good, but this and that. She said, it's really, if anyone tells you that it's less than sensational, forget it. It looks great. So those touchstones in the tennis world are very, very good for our confidence with the show going out. Because as Naomi just touched on, yes, it's about tennis. It's about the personal relationships that underlie tennis. But if we don't get the tennis right, that's the bit that can kill your show. If your show is set in space, if the weightlessness doesn't, gel, no one cares about the characters or the story. Everyone just talks about how, oh, that bit didn't work. And, you end up spending lots of money on a great big albatross. So it was really important to get that right.
One of the stand-up pieces in the show, and one of the standout sort of dynamics that evolves as you go through, and no spoilers for anyone here, but in terms of something that was very interesting is this dynamic between how Glenn interacts with his female players and with his male players. And we see that very different power dynamic between being quite insecure in a relationship with a male player and with a female player kind of trying to wrestle control or keep control in those situations. And that's something that I think will be really interesting to hear kind of both your takes on. One from kind of a player perspective, and kind of why, as you kind of touched upon at the start, there aren't necessarily more female coaches, or why this dynamic does exist in this way, and the difference between when it comes to having a male coach with kind of a female and a male player that they are coaching, but also in terms of the script and how important that was to show the disparity that exists there. So if we go maybe Naomi first for this one.
This is one of the early conversations I was having with Hania, and that in general, not everybody, but the vast majority, male players want to collaborate with the coach, and female players want a coach to take control. And that is just how it is. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's biology. I don't know whether it's ingrained in us from a young age, which is probably what I would lean a little bit more towards. But I think that is why also female players don't work with female coaches, because female coaches want to collaborate. They don't want to take charge of every aspect of your life and be getting involved in all sorts. They just want to help you improve on the tennis, and I think that's definitely a strong difference in the two. I think then that leads to, as you say, coaches suiting certain, like either men's tennis or women's tennis. So there's loads of coaches I know who are just like, yeah, no, I coach women. Yeah, I coach 14 to 17-year-old girls. That's what I coach. I'm like, it's tennis. It's a sport. Like, how is that a thing? Now, I understand, and you guys will know, women's tennis very different to men's tennis. But the differences are fairly obvious to understand, and to understand the reasons why. But really, when somebody says, I just coach girls or women or whatever, and we're talking about men because, as I say, the vast majority are men. It's just a massive red flag. It's like, how can you not coach a guy? I mean, surely you can do it. And they're like, yeah, no, it's not really my wheelhouse. And that is a lot about their approach of coaching. But as I say, it's not just on that side. That's what girls are looking for. I spent 6 years trying to be a coach and I got absolutely nowhere. It was impossible. I was working at an academy, and it was not really acceptable to work with any of the boys. So that's 60% of the kids I can't work with. Then you just got the girls, and the very, very top ones want a man to take charge. And then you're just left with essentially the bottom section of the girls that are a bit more recreational. So you can't get anywhere. And that was the reason as to why I gave up.
Yeah, it's it's a very tricky and challenging subject and dynamic, I think, and I think there's no doubt going to be parallels. I think when this does come out, to me anyway, was something that struck me even in the first episode were the similarities, I think, with a certain Emma Raducanu in terms of big player coming on at a young age and doing so well, and then rocked by injuries, wrist injuries. Did you kind of see any parallels, I guess, in the story between Justine and, I guess, Emma Raducanu specifically? I feel like it's hard to maybe block out what's kind of going on around you when you're maybe making these scripts. Do you choose to kind of just like let that influence you, or do you try and just kind of almost keep the script in isolation?
I mean, I think the only thing that I can do is create my characters and be truthful to their journey. So, I came up with the character of Justine and her wrist injury and her sort of journey through the series, as I say, the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So a long time before Emma Raducanu sort of exploded into the global consciousness by, winning the US Open. Now, of course, sure, I can see those parallels. I can see lots of different parallels. I look at Glenn and I go, wow, you're such a chameleon, and you really read people's emotions so well and figure out exactly who they need in their life psychologically. And you become that person. I go, oh, that's interesting. I can see that in coach-player relationships. I think if I've done my research right, and Naomi with her singular sort of rigor and insight into the world, if we've all done our jobs correctly, we'll be seeing these resonances all over the tennis world. I think the Emma Raducanu one is particularly precise. It certainly wasn't. It couldn't have been intended, but we didn't change it. At the last moment because those things came up, because it was a very particular part of our story. And actually, it's worth saying that when Emma won the US Open, it redoubled Amazon's interest in our show and really helped to push it towards production, because this young British player had suddenly done the unthinkable. And Amazon had previously been saying, oh, and do we really believe, and do we really? And it's like, yes, we do, quick, and yeah, I mean, it was already on the rails, but it certainly put an extra dose of fuel into that engine, which was really helpful.
And kind of on the situation kind of at large around some of the issues that we've talked about where it comes from. Like we mentioned in terms of what players are looking for, always kind of looking for, a lot of players look for male coaches when it comes to tennis, and some of the pieces that are talked about and are in this is around what you can do and what Justine does, and how people respond to that, and how that can kind of create a wave of people who then she actually almost one by one has to get to come on board with this. But how important is it for the show? There is this positive arc to what we could be looking at in terms of tennis as a whole, and how this dynamic can shift within tennis, so that it isn't something that always stays the same. It's
crucial. It's the singular most important part of the show, is the positive message, the inclusive spirit of it as well, because people have lots of different responses in difficult situations. Some of them make different decisions to each other. Is there one sort of singular way to behave. No, there's not. But I think with Justine, we all wanted to create a role model who was very difficult, unexpected, complex, but aspirational, someone who feels relevant and that people might be able to see their own experiences in, and that might build their confidence to reevaluate their experience, and creating those platforms for voices, for people to be heard and to speak and to just be in conversation about these themes is really key, at the same time as safeguarding evolves, which it is doing, of course.
Yeah, I really do hope it spurs on a wider conversation. I feel like we've almost in the last few years maybe hit the tip of the iceberg, and maybe this can do a lot in terms of, I think, banging on the drum for what's a really important topic, particularly on the in women's tennis at the moment. So it's going to be interesting to see. We've got a final couple of questions to ask you. They are non 15 Love related. Wimbledon.
If that's allowed. Is that allowed?
Actually, yeah. Is that allowed?
No,
Is that okay?
End call.
We've done our job.
Yeah.
Wimbledon is going on at the moment. Obviously, you've both been watching it and immersing yourself in it over the last kind of fortnight. Who have you been impressed by at Wimbledon this year? And who do you think, we're at the semi-final stage, it's ladies semi-finals day today, men's semi-finals day tomorrow. Who are winning the trophies for you?
A prediction, Naomi.
I'll dive in first, don't I? Since I'm supposed to know something. I picked Sabalenka at the start of the tournament, and for me, I think she's playing the best tennis. So
she's still in. That's a good prediction.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she's going to win. I'm not actually on that semi-final today, Richard Sabalenka semi-final. I'm on Svitolina Vondrousova, which I think will be fascinating. So I'll have to get your top tips on that one.
You don't want my top tips, and I don't think you want Chris's. I'm not going to be on.
You really don't
want
mine this Wimbledon.
It's probably better than mine, but so no, I'm looking forward to that. But I mean, it's amazing the tournament, how experienced it is this year. I think even throughout the quarterfinals, I mean, the least experienced players really were Svitolina and Pegula, who have both been top 5 players for a very, very long time. So, normally you get that real breakout. I mean, even Vondrousova in semis, she's been to the final of the Slam before. So all 8 quarterfinalists, so experienced. And then, same on the men's side, I mean, bar Chris Eubanks, but on the in the semi-finals, particularly the 4 guys you're looking at, there hasn't really been a big breakout, like all the way, as I say, barring Chris Eubanks, really. So I mean, he's been a fun story. I was on court 1 yesterday for his match, and I've never seen a crowd so into a match where it was just serve and volley, serve and volley.
Yeah.
It was not the most thrilling of matches, but they were absolutely loving it. So there you go. So I mean, and on the men's side, I mean, no one's going to touch Djokovic.
No,
absolutely absurd.
Okay, we can agree on that.
Yeah, agreed.
Hania, are you in the same boat there on Novak Djokovic?
I mean, I'm going to go with the tide here as by far the least experienced or tennis savvy person. I'm putting my ballot in with yours.
Okay.
Personally, I've loved watching Ons in this tournament. I love her spirit. I think she's such a great role model. I just think she's such a good personality. And when she's done these astounding shots, and then they play it in slow-mo, and it still looks like she's moving too fast for it to be possible.
Yeah.
And that's been great. And it's been interesting to see Andreeva coming through as such a young player after working on this show. And I really feel for her, trying to maintain that balance between emotion and stress and her, and having such a good run. So
definitely, that is a big story, and I think that's the story that we're going to see play out, particularly over the season and probably in years to come. One final question, and it's a question we ask all our guests who come onto the Tennis Weekly podcast. It's got nothing to do with tennis.
Nothing at all.
Chris, I think, actually hates when we ask this question, but I've got to ask it anyway because, as I say, we ask it to everyone. We're a British podcast. We've got an international following, and we've got to ask: how do you take your tea? Are you tea drinkers or are you coffee drinkers?
We need to know. Pims, that's what I said.
Tea bags, types of milk. What's your tea game?
All right, so I said that I like disruptors in tennis. I have become a massive disruptor in the world of tea. So I drink sort of a English breakfast with oat milk. And when I started drinking it, it tasted like dishwater. And now I'm a total convert. I know it's a bit wrong, but actually for me, it's very right.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
It's a good one.
Yes, I'm very much a tea drinker, not as much as my parents, who go through an entire cabinet of mugs a day. I think my go-to would be Earl Grey, splash milk.
Yeah.
That's about it, really.
I think classic.
I mean, can't go wrong there. Can't go wrong there.
Also, like a bit of English breakfast or anything going as long as it's tea. Not really into herbal.
She's not fussy. If it starts with a TEA, then it's in.
Yeah, done.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on to the show. We're really, really looking forward to 15 Love coming out on Amazon Prime. I believe it comes out on the 21st of July.
That's right.
Is that right?
Friday 21st.
And that'll be available all over the world. So wherever you are, you should be able to watch it through.
That will be
Amazon
available
Prime.
Initially in the UK.
Okay.
And then we'll have the global launch after that.
Okay, great. So listeners, watch out for 15 Love. We're going to be putting a link to where you can watch it in the description. But for the meantime, Naomi and Hania, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the show. It's been a revelation. I think it's been really interesting to hear the perspective from writing it, but also the perspective of being a former tennis player. So thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Oh, it's been great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Listeners, I hope you've enjoyed our latest episode of the Tennis Weekly podcast. Remember to subscribe to us to stay up to date on all the action to come from the ATP and WTA tours. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major podcasting platforms out there. And if you like what you're hearing, then make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
You can also follow us on social media or email the show. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at Tennis Weekly Pod. And so we'll be expecting Hania and Naomi to follow us on all those channels, as well as to email the show at tennisweeklypod@gmail.com and check out the website tennisweekly.co.uk.
And we will be back next time at Tennis Weekly HQ for another episode of the Tennis Weekly podcast. So I hope you can join us for that. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from Chris.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. We'll see you again soon.